In this video, we'll explore how to work with keys that have been created with Channel Chimp. So I've created a very simple scene here with 3 items, and I animated them using Channel Chimp. So you can see I've got one channel for each of the items. Now back in Modo, let me press play for the timeline and we can see the animation that I've created. So I moved the sphere up and down, and then I created an animation of the cube moving from side to side. And lastly, the cone, which is scaling larger and smaller. Now, if you look in the item list, we can see that there's the sphere item. And here I have a hierarchy for the cube and cone. They're in a group. And first we have the cube, which is animated side to side. And then the cone, that's a child of the cube. So it's going side to side because it's following its parent, the cube. But the cone, I only did an animation for the scale on it. All right, let's stop the playback. And if I select the cube, you'll notice that no keys are showing up here in the graph editor. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at Modo's schematic. And you can see here's the cube item, but the keys don't live on the item. With Channel Chimp, the keys are placed out here on this Channel Chimp modifier. And the modifier feeds the animation keys into the item, in this case, the cube. And you can see the same thing here. We have the Channel Chimp modifier for the cone, creating the scaling effect, which is feeding into the cone item scale. And finally, we have the Channel Chimp's sphere modifier here, feeding into the sphere item's position Y. And when we select the Channel Chimp modifier, now in the graph editor, we can see the keys because that's where they're living on the Channel Chimp modifier. So one way that you could access those keys is if we go to the cube, and then down here in the properties, if I right click on the position X and choose select input items, that will select the Channel Chimp modifier that's feeding into it and show us the keys. But we have an even more convenient and flexible way now with Channel Chimp 2, and that's from this menu item, the Channel Chimp drop-down menu, and there's an option called Show Keys. So in Modo's normal workflow, when nothing is selected, everything's selected. So right now I have nothing selected, so when I choose Show Keys, it will select everything. In this case, all of the Channel Chimp modifiers in the scene, which gives us access to the keys for all of the items. I'm going to hit Escape a couple times to drop the selection. If I was to just select the sphere, however, and choose Show Keys, now I will see the keys for only the sphere. If I select the cube and cone group and select Show Keys, now we see the keys for the cube and the cone. And what's happened here is Channel Chimp will look below whatever you've selected at the hierarchy to find Channel Chimp modifiers. So for example, if I chose the cube, and again we choose Show Keys, we get the keys for the cube and its child, the cone. But if I choose the cone and select Show Keys, now I only see the keys for the cone because it has nothing below it in the hierarchy. Now, in addition to the menu, we have another fast way to choose the keys, which is using the shortcut Shift-K. So if we hit Shift-K, again, we have nothing selected, it will select all the keys, which is handy because these menu items don't show up in every layout. For example, in the Animate layout, we won't see this menu item. So that's where using the quick key of Shift-K can be very handy. Now, if I just drag here above the command to expand it a little bit, and I look at my history, you can see that a script command was fired called chimpkeys.py. Now, if for some reason your Shift-K isn't working because perhaps you already have it mapped to something different, then you can always expand this command history, right-click, and say Map Command to Key, and choose whatever key you'd prefer as your shortcut for activating that command and selecting the keys. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is baking. Baking is used because the keys live on the Channel Chimp modifiers. If you were to provide this scene to, for example, a render farm, and they don't own the Channel Chimp plugin, then these modifiers would not appear and your scene wouldn't be able to work. So we've provided a feature here under the Channel Chimp dropdown called Bake. When we bake, the keys are transferred onto standard Modo modifiers. So now you could save this scene and provide it to a render farm, or someone who doesn't own Channel Chimp. When we play the animation, you can see that it looks exactly the same as it did previously. I recommend that you consider baking as a one-way street. So when you're ready to send the scene to the render farm, back up the version with the Channel Chimp modifiers prior to baking. But if something goes wrong or you accidentally bake a scene, we have provided a feature called Unbake. So when we unbake, it restores the Channel Chimp modifiers in the scene. In the schematic, you can see that each of the Channel Chimp modifiers has been returned to the scene. And when we play the timeline, you can see that the animation looks the same as it did before.